I didn't anticipate my father to embarrass me in front of everyone. There I was standing in the middle of a magnificent dining hall, surrounded by relatives, members dressed in their nicest. The air was dense with the aroma of grilled pork and pricey wine. A much more unpleasant judgment. "You are nothing but a letdown, my." The father's voice pierced through the noise. Like a sword, his icy, scrutinizing eyes bore into me, filled with contempt. "You're merely." Failure. The room fell silent. All eyes turning to me, I tightened my fists. I had come with nails pressing into my palm. I expected tension, but this is not it. Father has always been distant, but his words were unique and personal. They weren't just designed to reprimand me, intended to break me apart. He took a step closer, swirling the wine in his glass. "Before dismissing male work, is this actually what you've resorted to doing? You have no..." Unfortunately, several of my aunts exchanged, looked visibly uneasy, but no one dared to step in. I swallowed hard. "There is nothing wrong with your throat being dry." "Hard job, Papa," he said sharply. Laugh, shaking his head. "Hard work you. Consider scrubbing floors and lifting boxes. Is hard work you were born into. Advantage, yet you chose to denigrate. You bring shame to our name." I could feel my breathing become shallow. My vision was narrowing. I had spent years attempting to demonstrate my effectiveness at work. He worked tirelessly, but none of it mattered before I could say anything. Another voice interrupted, carried a weight that silenced even my father. "You should all know the truth." Truth. The voice belongs to my granddad had remained sitting at the far end of the long dining table. I was quiet during my father's life, yet now as he was cautiously standing up, all eyes. His granddad was a man of few words, yet when he spoke, people. His gray hair was well-groomed. The back glittered beneath the chandelier light. His presence demanded my respect. Father's smirk faltered for the first time. "What is the truth?" he questioned, his voice hesitant. Grandfather put both hands on his gaze swept over everyone. Before focusing on my father, his next words sent a shockwave across the room. "The only shame here is yours, not hers." Murmurs erupted visibly from my father. The tense grandfather breathed slowly, before keeping his voice steadfast. "You think you know where wealth is. You believe that this empire was developed by sitting in desks and wearing expensive suits. Look down on those who work with their hands." His eyes gleamed crisp with something illegible. "Then you should hear the truth with." He began unraveling a story that would change everything everyone learned. Even my father, who just seconds before had. He looked so confident about himself now. The anxious grandfather glanced at me before, looking back toward the crowd. These family. It was not founded on luxury but on. He sweated blood and worked hard. Straightened. And it started with me. "Blinked what you see," he continued as when I was younger, I didn't have a single. Unlike my son here, I have a penny to my name. I gave my father a sharp look but did not inherit wealth. I built it. Gasp spread across the table. "What are you talking about?" "About my father," he continued, his voice tense. Granddad ignored him. "I began as a construction worker. I spent several years breaking my back pouring bricks and mixing cement work under the scorching sun. Just to survive, every dime I made went towards building this family. I never felt guilt in my heart. Pounded. I had never heard this before. Manual labor is not beneath us." Continued. "It helped us see my father's face. That's silly, you always said. You helped me build our fortune through investments." Granddad chuckled dryly. "Investments." His voice became sharper. "The first land I acquired, I couldn't even afford. I worked hard all day and night. I worked hard to earn enough money. The initial investment for the entire room was..." Startled silence. And now he glanced at me. "Father, you belittle your own daughter for doing what I once did. You mock her for working with her hands like I did." He scoffed. "It is not she who brings You are responsible for bringing dishonor to this family. I forgot where we came from. Father's jaw clenched. Enough. Grandfather's stated voice stern. I am not. After finishing, he turned to me, and for the first time that night, I felt something. Unexpected pride. You remind me of myself, he said, and that is why I made A. My stomach flipped over a decision. Grandfather looked at the rest of the family. I've been thinking about this. For a long period, he said, I built. This empire must soon be taken over. Of course, my father stood up straight. That was always the plan. No, grandfather cut him off. Their eyes met. I chose her for the entire room. Erupted in whispers, my father shot up from a seat. His face was crimson with wrath. Cannot be serious. Grandfather remained unshaken. I have never been more serious. In my life, my breath caught Granddad. He held up his hand, silencing me. I've watched you work, struggle, fight, and persevere when others. I would have given up, that's what. My father slammed his glass down, spilling red wine over the white. You can't just hand the tablecloth. She isn't fit to take on everything. Run anything. Grandfather's eyes clouded. And you ours. He let the words to soak in. Before adding, you have wasted your life, living off my success and ridiculing those who. Actually, you have done nothing to. I deserve my father's empire. His breathing was heavy, and his fists were clenched. This is a joke. It is justice's grandfather. When I looked at my father, he had always been resentful, believed he was entitled to everything. And now the rug has been ripped out from under him. I felt a fire kindle within me. It wasn't just about me anymore. About illustrating the value of hard effort, regardless of where you are, you could construct something for. I straightened my spine and met. My father's stare was unwavering. He was determined to view me as failure. He was about to see just how wrong he was. The place was in disarray. Family members spoke furiously among themselves. They exchanged astonished looks at me. The father's face was full with emotions. Rage, astonishment, and humiliation. On the opposite hand felt completely. I felt different for the first time in my life. I felt seen. Grandfather had selected me, and I had spent years of being looked down upon and insulted. I was treated as if I were useless. And now, in front of everyone, the most powerful, someone in our family, had designated me my successor. Father, you can't be serious. Father's voice was horrible. His hands. He was shivering as he grasped the edge. Tables she has no experience, no business. I believe she's been spending her time with. Menial chores. Grandfather inhaled sharply. What have you been doing with his gaze? Was piercing, leeching off my hard labor, living in luxury, and looking down on the foundation that gave you that. My father opened his mouth, then closed it, and his face turned red. I could feel my heart pound in my chest. I wasn't certain if it was from excitement or fear. This was happening too fast, and I hadn't even processed what it meant. Granddad, I said, my voice comes out steadier than I. Are you certain about this? The frown softened as he gazed at me. I've never been more certain about anything throughout my life, but I hesitated. Have the business background. I'm not like them. It is precisely why you are. He stated unequivocally that this was the right decision. Family needs someone who understands. Hard work is worth more than simply a number. Spreadsheet. I swallowed hard. I've always thought of myself as an outsider in this household, is the person who I did not belong. Yet hearing those words, my grandfather made something inside me shift. My father, but wasn't. I'm ready to give up. This is absurd. Snapped. I've spent my entire life prepared to take over. She can't simply walk in and take what's mine. Grandfather's eyes darkened. Yours. I believe you are entitled to my legacy just because of your last name. He shook his head in despair. You were supposed to earn it, but you never did. My father's. His chest heaved, and his expression was filled with fury and worry. He wasn't simply losing in. He was losing control of his inheritance. the power he had spent years lording over. He mumbled, "Over others, this isn't over." His voice is dangerously low, Grandad. Gave him a harsh look. "That is up to you." And with that, the conversation was. Grandfather sat back down, slowly sipping his drink. The room remained uncomfortable, but none dared to challenge him. The significance of what had just occurred settled on me. I had recently been named the heir to a large empire, but I made an enemy of my father, and something assured me he wouldn't let this go. The gathering ended with some awkward silence. Relatives ducked my sight, offered me cautious nods of acceptance. Father had stormed out my mother, trailing him with an anxious look. I sighed, running a hand. This was unreal. "You're in for a fight, you know." I turned to see. My cousin Daniel stands alongside me. Was one of the few in the family actually got along with, and let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, I got that impression," he gave. "I'm half smiling at how you handled yourself. While back there, I couldn't handle anything I muttered." Grandfather did it. Shrugged, "But you did not back down. That is more than most individuals in this. Family members can remark." I enjoyed his words. However, they did not lessen the mounting strain. In my chest, this was not just about me. This was about establishing that I was deserving of what had just been handed. I had no notion where to start. Before I could say anything else, the phone buzzed with a message from someone unknown. Number, "You do not belong in this planet." I felt compelled to leave before it was too late. The conflict had sent a shudder down my spine. Beginning the next morning, I awoke. To discover my name written all over. The news billionaire names are unqualified. Granddaughter as heir disaster. Decision on the future leader or nepotism. Case gone wrong, previous manual labor set. Experts react on inheriting the family empire. My stomach churned. I had never been in. Previously, I was in the public eye. Focus of attention for everything wrong. Why I reached for my phone, heart pounding when I looked around social media. The media's criticisms were nasty. "She has no business experience. This is a joke." If I were in that family, I'd be furious with her. She utilized her grandfather's favoritism to jump the line. I gritted my teeth. I expected resistance from my father, but now the entire world had an opinion about me. A call came in. It was Grandfather. I answered promptly. "Grandad." "Assuming you've seen the news," he stated, his voice calm. "Yes, I admitted," he sighed. "The media will always have something to say. What matters is how you respond." I close my eyes, and how I respond, you proven. They were wrong. It was easier said than done. As I soon discovered, my father had no intention of allowing me to succeed. Over the following week, I was thrown into deep-end meetings, financial reports. The business lingo made my head spin. I barely had time to breathe, but I pushed. I worked late at night, studying everything I could. I refused to. Became the failure they anticipated me to be. Then one morning I walked into a board meeting and recognized there was something wrong. Everyone was whispering with their eyes flipped toward me, scarcely hidden. I smirked and frowned as I slid into my seat. "What's going on?" My father sat across from me, a proud gleam in his eyes. "You are about to learn that the CEO was cleared." "Miss, I have some concerns about his throat." Stiff in worries, he slid a document across the table concerning your treatment of. I picked up the company's financials. My blood rushed as I scanned the figures. Cold, this wasn't simply a little mistake. The financial report was a disaster. Leaked data reveals enormous losses under. I had not generated any damages under my name. That was fabricated, a setup. I looked up and saw my father observing me. "Smiling makes you appear unfit." "After all," he said calmly. My grasp on the paper tightened. This was war, and I was not going down without a fight. The air inside the boardroom was suffocating. I felt the weight of each pair of eyes are watching me, waiting for me to crumble. My father sat across from me, reclining back in his chair and smirking. "That made my blood boil," he drawled. He tilts his head mockingly. Do you have anything to say for yourself? I clenched. My jaw and fingers tightened around the. I scanned the numbers again, looking for anything that would explain how this happened. I was aware that these losses were not genuine. We weren't, but everyone else in this. They were unmistakable proof of my incompetence. These stats are incorrect. Finally, my voice remained solid despite storm inside me. I never approved these transactions. The CEO gave me a pitying look. Look, the documents say differently. Mississippi, I inhaled sharply then. Someone interfered with my gaze. Snapped my father, and I believe we all know who that someone is. Gasps rippled. However, my father just giggled. Oh, love, he moaned and blamed others for your mistakes, which is not very professional. The sheer arrogance of his. The tone made my stomach turn. I could see he wasn't simply trying. He attempted to discredit me, humiliate and break me in front of these folks, but I refused to allow him. I stood up and said, Win, give me 48 hours. I'll prove that these stats are bogus. The CEO hesitated, the rest of the board. They exchanged suspicious glances before eventually. The CFO nodded fine and said, But if you can't verify it, you'll be deleted. I took a deep breath. I understood and turned to leave. But before I locked eyes with my father, the sneer was still present, but something more in his gaze, too. Amusement. He assumed he had already won, but he had underestimated me, which was a huge mistake. I slept that night and pored over everything. Every transaction log contains financial documents, trying to discover the weakness in my father's setup. But who forged these? Numbers did an excellent job of covering their traces. I needed help, and there was only one person that I trusted. Daniel, my cousin, was already waiting when I got to his flat. Early in the morning, he glanced at my face and groaned. Let me guess, your father finally made his moves. I handed. He is attempting to frame me with the files he has. You have 48 hours to show that this is bogus or I'm out. Daniel whistled. And he's not playing around. I stroked my temples. Exhausted. Can you help me or not? Smile. Do you even have to ask? Within minutes, he had set up his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he evaluated the transaction records. Stared in astonishment. Daniel had always been. The family has a tech-savvy member, and right now I needed every ounce of his. An hour passed, then 2, and finally located. Daniel asked immediately. I shot up. What? He turned the screen toward me. There is a difference in the timestamp. The system logs every action even. Someone edited these documents. After they were first made, I leaned in with my heart pumping, and then I detected a digital footprint and an IP address. I sucked in my father's breath. Office, Daniel grinned. Bingo, we have him. But I wasn't going to approach him just now. However, if he wanted to play dirty, I would show him that I could play smarter. It was time to turn the tables the following day. I entered the boardroom with I had never felt so confident before. The father was already there, relaxing in his chair, is ready to watch me fail well. The CEO asked if you had any evidence to substantiate your assertion. I inserted the documents on the table were. These figures changed, but I also have proof of who manipulated the board. Members leaned in and I pressed a button. My tablet and a screen lighted up behind me. A security log appeared, displaying exactly when the financial documents were tampered with, and at the bottom is the IP address of my father's office. The silence was terrible. I turned to face. My father watched as the smirk vanished. His face paled. Could you explain? This father requested nicely and opened his. The CEO opened his mouth but did not speak. He cleared his throat. This is serious. Another board member shook his head. Cannot disregard this kind of trickery. Murmurs spread around the room. Dad was losing control, and I was simply getting started. My father's face was storm of emotions, shock, fury, and most of all fear he'd spent years restraining. The story guarantees that no one ever questioned his authority, and now I had stripped him of that in every instant. Power, I folded my arms, allowing the silence settled, allowing him to feel the weight of his own demise is outrageous. He finally spat his voice, sharp with desperation. These records might have been altered by anyone. Smirked, so you won't mind us investigating further. I turned to the right. I recommend that the CEO conduct a comprehensive forensic audit, including all latest financial transactions, just to be sure this isn't a larger. My father heaped on the issue. He knew. That suggested he had probably done much worse than merely framing me once. The auditors began digging. They would find everything that will not be needed. He instantly answered, "Oh, I believe it's the CFO." Stated his voice coldly. This company cannot afford fraud or corruption. My father clenched his jaw, his hands balling up into fists. He was stuck, and he knew it then. The CEO turned to me. "You've proven. Today," he said, "we will clear your name, and I will personally assure you are given the resources to excel in this capacity." I nodded. "Thank you." The CEO then stared at my father as if, "We'll need to have a talk regarding your future with this company." He saw it when he knew I lost for the first time in my life. My father held no authority over me, and I felt amazing that evening when I returned home feeling victorious. But I knew better not to celebrate too soon. My father was not the type of man who accepted defeat, and I was correct. Later that night, I got a message from an unknown number. "Remember this. Isn't over. You took something. Was not yours, and I'm going to take it." I exhaled gently, grasping my phone. I expected this, but my father didn't. Just going to disappear into the background. He was going to fight, and I wasn't. He was willing to go to any length to kill me, but I wasn't afraid because I'd earned something he never did. My place, and I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, Aoki awoke to chaotic news. Articles inundated social media painting I was an inexperienced, spoiled eyes who had taken a billion-dollar empire from nepotism, leaves a legacy in the wrong hands. From labor to CEO, the questionable rise. According to sources, an unqualified successor. Internal discord is pulling apart the organization. I knew who was behind this. My father used the media to defame me, to change public opinion against me before I even had the opportunity to prove myself, but he had underestimated. I contacted Daniel again. "I need you to track who leaked these stories," for an hour. Later, he had an answer, which is coming from PR firms related to your father's personal accounts. He said he was spending millions to dominate the story. Clenched my jaw, and we shifted the tale, and I knew just what to do. Rather than combating the rumors, I embraced them and booked a live interview about the biggest business network, sitting across from a ruthless journalist known for tearing people. I let them ask me the most difficult questions. Questions that people claim you don't deserve. "What are your thoughts on this position?" "They have the right to question me," I said. "Honestly, but I also say give me time. My deeds speak for themselves." "Yours. Your father claims you manipulated him, granddad, into granting you control. You dispute that my grandfather made his. He trusted in me, and I made the decision." I refused to let him down. By the time the interview ended and public perception had shifted, I had turned myself from spoiled eyes enters the underdog fight, seeking her due place, and everyone loved an underdog. A week later, my father stormed into my office. "You think you've..." As he screamed, I slumped back in my chair. "Calm. Haven't I got?" His hands clenched. "I have no idea what you're doing." I met his look, and yet I'm still standing. "You're the one who has lost everything." He was breathing heavily throughout his body, radiating fury, but there was something in his gaze, something almost like dread, because deep down he knew I wasn't. I was no longer weak. I had fought back. Winning wasn't simple. There were still people in the workplace who questioned me. Investors who hesitated challenged that. It seemed impossible, yet I worked harder than I've ever experienced, and after months, proving myself after overcome everything. Finally, I came to a barricade. Employees of the company delivered. The speech of my life, my grandfather constructed this company from the ground up, said, and I plan to honor his legacy. Rather than sitting at an office, ensure that everyone in this firm is valued regardless of their origin. Applause broke out for the first time. I felt like I belonged, but I never saw mine. Afterwards, he disappeared, drowning in his own consequences. At times, I wondered if he regretted what he did, but in the end it didn't matter that I had built something. I had done better than he ever could. Built it on respect and hard effort. That was a legacy worth leaving. Years later, as I went through the company I now run, I passed by I stopped while a janitor was scrubbing the floors. I bent down and grabbed another mop. Janitor glanced at me in disbelief. "Miss you. You don't have to do that," I smiled. "No work is beneath me because this is my granddad gave me a lesson, and I never forget it." Looking back, I realized that my father had always. I was concerned that if people liked, I proved that hard work was more important than privilege. His entire lifestyle would break apart, and in the end it was exactly what happened, but I had constructed something powerful, something real, and I would never let it be taken away because I stood in my office, looking out at the skyline. I knew I had done something. No. Unexpectedly, I had turned my greatest humiliation into my greatest victory. By doing so, I became more than merely. I became known as unstoppable, and it was merely the beginning.